Thank you very much. Um, I guess the media has been very engaged in very enthralling debate that's taken place in the National Assembly. And unfortunately, what we'd anticipated, which should be a contest of ideas and vision, through all of the rhetoric, that doesn't become very evident to people what we're hoping to achieve. So I just thought that in this more sober environment, that at least I can help to share the difference in philosophy between the two competing sides, and a bit of what we're hoping to achieve through this budget in the realization of the vision that we laid out some time ago through our manifesto and subsequent policy statements by the President. To understand the budget and the starting point from the two competing sides, we have to go back to the financial philosophy of the two parties. Often when we accuse the PNC, APNU, AFC of being a consumption-based party, a party that does not prepare for the future, a party that taxes and spend in a particular manner, people often judge us harshly. They say it's just a label. And so you do have to really examine the numbers to see if this characterization is an accurate one. And today, right at the beginning, I want to take you through some of these numbers so that you yourself can see that what we're saying is substantiated by their own policy. Now, in 2014, that was the last year that the People's Progressive Party presented a budget to the National Assembly. The total budget was $220 billion. The recurrent budget, or the current budget, was $138 billion, and the capital budget was $81 billion. So I'm not going to go through every single year, but let's go to the last budget that the APNU presented. And I want to take you to the last budget, which was for 2019, how those figures changed. So the total budget grew from $220 billion to $300 billion, an increase of 36%. The recurrent budget, or the current budget, grew from $138 billion to $231 billion, an increase of 67%. And the capital budget declined from $81 billion to $69 billion. So what is the capital budget and that had little attention? In fact, the expenditure over a 5-year period declined on capital spending. And what is capital spending? Capital spending is where you build your schools, your hospitals, your roads, your bridges, your power plants, your sea defenses. This was accorded very little priority. They set up the basis for future growth in the economy, because if you don't have your port facilities and roads and power and all of these, what I spoke of, then you can't have long-term growth in the economy. And every country needs to invest in a major way to do that. So APNU, in the years they've been in office, they started off with $81 billion in 2014. In 2015, it fell to $39 billion, $52 billion in 2016, $56 billion in 2017, $59 billion in 2018, and $69 billion in 2019. On the other hand, the current expenditure, that is money to be for rentals of building and vehicles and other stuff, goods and services that you can't touch. Today we can't see it. The capital things, that if they had built them, we would have seen them. Those are the things that were accorded the greatest priority. It's consumption-based. So they spent $231 billion. That grew by 67%. And that is why we say it's a consumption-based party that is focused heavily on that philosophy. It doesn't think about future growth, and the numbers tell that story. On the same period, on the tax side, so they not only spent a lot, but tax revenues grew from $135 billion to $225 billion, an increase of about 67%. This is very, very important. So when I listen to people speak in the National Assembly about the future of this country and about future growth and well-being, if we had continued with their philosophy, we're going to end up, over time this builds up, consuming everything we earn with no provisions for the future, not building the infrastructure of the future that will ensure that jobs of the future jobs are guaranteed or generated, and that we can't ensure the future well-being of our people. So let's come to the PPP now, and what has happened in the last 2 years. Last year, because if we leave out 2020 as a year of transition. In 2021, the recurrent expenditure was $279 billion. The capital expenditure had grown from $69 billion in 2019 to $103 billion. So immediately we increased it significantly by about $34 billion in the first full year in office. And in this year's budget, the current expenditure has grown, a first budget to be financed by oil and gas revenue. The current expenditure has grown to $335 billion, an increase of 20% from last year. And the capital budget has grown from $103 billion to $217 billion, a 110% increase. That is, we're building for the future. That's where we're spending our money, on the future well-being of this country, investing in things that the country will be able to see and touch, not things that all the spending they've had that disappeared because it's gone, it's current, you never could see it. And that left room for a lot of thievery. When you talk about corruption, people love to spend on the recurrent side because it disappears, you don't see it. So this is a very, very important point for us. Imagine us growing from the last budget that they presented, $69 billion on capital, to today, $217 billion on capital. And this tells the story of PPP governments and the story of the transformation of this country, why we did so well without oil and gas money from the period we took office, when the debt burden was, debt overhang was 9 times that of our economy, and to service debt we used 153% of revenue. And by the time we left office, we were using less than 10% of revenue to service debt. We had invested back in the roads and the power plants and the schools, etc., in spite of having to deal with that burden. APNU came back in government and it went back to the philosophy that led to us in the 80s becoming one of the most heavily indebted country in the world, a consumption-led philosophy. So what you hear in there, in that chamber, this is the underlying philosophy that doesn't often get reflected in the presentations. And it's something vital if we want as a country to progress, we have to pay attention to, including the people who have been sometimes, they run off on the small issues and they miss the big picture. They miss the big picture. Oh, we didn't have enough money here, or we had too much there. But they miss this big picture. And I'm not going to belabor this point, but I hope that you in the media and many of the analysts would start following on this. And this is crucial too for spending oil money, because many countries in the world, when they had oil money or they got the windfall, what they did immediately, they started paying themselves higher salaries. They started pushing up the current budget of the country. And when the oil money goes, you're stuck with those expenditures. Or when you had a downturn in oil revenue, like in so many countries in the world, Trinidad and Tobago, we've seen in Suriname, many parts of the world. If you spend on the capital side and you have a downturn in oil proceeds or revenue, you can simply forego or scale back on some of the projects because it's not recurrent. It doesn't come back in the next year's budget. And that is right from the beginning. We were determined. We made it clear in opposition that we shall not make the mistake of other countries. That when you get the oil money, do like what they're advocating, they spend all of it immediately on splurging on things that don't bring future benefits to our people and don't bring and lead to gross capital formation in a country, which is vital for future growth and for having a balanced economy, avoiding the Dutch disease, the dreaded Dutch disease. So that philosophy, we made sure that although the oil money came in, we maintained it. And we also went back to the philosophy, even when we didn't have oil money, we were investing in the future of our country every single year by giving higher priority to capital expenditure, which is vital. So that's the first point I want to make, that often you're not going to hear over there, but it's so important for future management of Guyana. The second point that we hear is that the budget is not pro-poor, as though APNU had pro-poor policies. So I want to take you through just a few of the features of the budget to show how although we had to maintain that philosophy on using the oil money to ensure that you don't have the change in relative prices, that how people's welfare in this country is a great priority in the budget and to the People's Progressive Party, and consistent, and how we remain consistent to the pledges we made to people when we campaigned, when we made promises to them. We want to fulfill those promises. So we promised to double pension in the 5 years. I remember in 2015, APNU said, immediately upon assumption in office, they will double pensions. Of course, that never happened. If you go to their 2015 manifesto, because that is a party that doesn't believe in fulfilling its manifesto, but we do. So we said we'll double it. So far, we have increased in the 2 years pensions by 40% in the 2 years. So we are on the way to doubling it in the 5 years. In the first year, we increased it by $5,000. And the total cost of that, additional cost to the budget, was $4.5 billion. This year, it went up another 3,000, so that takes you to 8,000, which is a 40% increase because it was on a 20,000 base. So how much more this year will pensioners be getting that they were not getting when APNU was in government per year? This year, pensioners will receive $7.2 billion more than they were receiving under APNU, the last year of APNU. And if you look at the 2 years cumulatively, it's $11.7 billion. But let's take 2022 alone. This year, our pensioners will be getting in their pockets $7.2 billion more than they were getting under APNU. Secondly, the school kids, because we care grant. So it was $10,000 in the last PPP government. It came down to zero under APNU. We increased it to $15,000 last year, and we promised to reinstate it and to take it to $50,000 per child in the 5-year period. This year, we've increased it to $205,000, so that's a 50% increase. Or a 50%, and not a 50% increase, because it was zero. It's an infinite percent. It was zero on the APNU, it's 25,000 now, so you can't even calculate the percentages increase because it was on a zero base. But it's half of our pledge that we have made. So how much, and we've done something else. We've now extended this to private schools too, kids in private schools. So 200,000 of our children will get this. This is equivalent to $5 billion. So our children now will get $5 billion more this year directly from the government that they didn't get under APNU. In fact, it was taken away by APNU. And there's nothing for poor. There's nothing here for poor people or children, if you listen to the APNU presenters there. The school uniform has moved from $2,000 now to $5,000. We never even promised that, but that has increased by over 100%. It used to be $2,000, the school uniform grant, and we increased it to now $5,000. So that will cost this year an additional $600 million, where that will go to the 200,000 school kids. On public assistance, it will increase to 800, they will get $840 million more than they were getting under APNU per year. So if you look at all of this, let's add down this list, only in 4 categories. That's $14 billion more just in these 4 categories that people will be receiving than they were getting under APNU. Only in these 4 categories. Let's move on. On the Gold Scholarship Program, that was not there under APNU. So 6,000 persons now have a scholarship, and we're spending $1 billion. We spent $1 billion last year. This year, we're putting in an additional $1.3 billion. We have another 4,500 persons who will get scholarships. In these 2 years alone, we will have 10,500 scholarships being given to people at the cost of over $2 billion. Now we promised to get 20,000 scholarships in the 5 years period. In the first 2 years, we're fulfilling that promise. This is going again to our people, directly to them. That's $2.3 billion. We have, APNU, removed the CSOs, the Amerindians, who were there, who were getting a $30,000 a month grant, and they're like a stipend in the communities. Nearly 1,972 of them were fired. So we rehired 2,000 of those people last year, and now the $700 million that APNU had taken away from the village economies was restored. And this year, the number will increase to 2,500 CSOs, and it will go up to $900 million. So the people in those communities will now have 2,500 people who were not working under APNU or getting that stipend, a small stipend, not real salary. They will get that back, 2,500 persons, and their $900 million will flow into the village economies. That's not pro puro. And then the 10,000 house lots. We've given out in the first 2 years more house lots distributed than APNU did in the entire 5 years, on the way to 50,000. We put in the budget this year enough money to do another infrastructure for about 30,000 house lots, because we promised to 50,000 new house lots. And that is not pro puro, because this is mainly low-income housing, not high-income housing. Then on the, it's the barefacedness that really troubles me when people talk about pro puro, and you could increase the fees and taxes, 200 fees and taxes on a single budget. You recall the infamous Jordan's budget, where everything was increased. All the licensing fees, some moving by 400, 600%. They don't recall that we, immediately when we came into office, we cut those by 50%, the fees, and we removed back the taxes. Many of them were affecting poor people, including taxes on data and water and electricity and a whole range of food items, etc. When you look at the cumulative value of that, in 2020, it was about $40 billion. Now it's about $50 billion of our tax measures. So that's $50 billion that people had to pay in taxes that they're paying less now. That still remains in their pocket. And they talk about being pro-poor and pro-farmers. And then you remember increasing taxes on fertilizer, on pesticides, on the poor farmers. These are poor people too, who are barely struggling to make a living, to increase their land and water charges by 300%. You recall a lot of those issues. They forget it. So this whole rhetoric about being pro-poor and not that the budget is all for rich people, it's an utter nonsense. And when you compare track records, that is what I just did. So we have a provision making a deductible if you go and take private insurance now, medical insurance. You get to be able to deduct that, or up to $30,000 from your taxes. They didn't need that because you recall the government had a special medical scheme for ministers that they put in place. And that scheme, they were supposed to, government pay half of it, and they were supposed to pay the other half. They never did pay the other half. So you ended up with the government paying all of it, the premium. So they had a preferential scheme put in place for ministers and their families. So they didn't have to worry about a measure like that if you want to take private medical insurance. But we did that in this budget. And the fact that we remove taxes on heavy-duty equipment and all of that sort of thing, and we level the playing field between our bidders and the foreign bidders for the oil and gas sector. It had been a complaint of our private sector, and it fell on deaf ears on the APNU, that the concessions that were given to the oil and gas companies were then extended to the foreign bidders. So when they bid for ExxonMobil, say, job or some job in the oil and gas sector, they would bid net of taxes. And the local people had to bid with taxes involved. So they were placed at a competitive disadvantage. Now we are saying if anyone is bidding for those contracts, the same treatment that the foreign companies get, our local companies would also get. So if they're bidding net of taxes based on the agreement that APNU signed with ExxonMobil, then our locals have to enjoy the same benefit. And it's part of correcting the wrongdoing. So I hear them talking about, trucks and all of this, people getting waivers for truck. If we want to build out the infrastructure in this country, all the highways and stuff, we want more competition. We want our local people to own more trucks and the contracting industry to expand. We need this badly now to build out this aggressive capital program we have. We have to help people to do that. They're obsessing with those issues. That is for rich people. Well, it's not just rich people. It's a guy who might own one truck and want to set up, supply sand or something. Now he could afford to make an investment in that. So a lot of poor people are going to benefit from this. The rich often find ways of getting creative accounting. Poor people often get the brunt of the taxes. And so a lot of those, if you hear the obsession, it's a rich people's budget, or they choose those measures, the waiver of the taxes on capital equipment, etc., as an indicator that it's a budget designed for the wealthy. It is not. It's consistent with our vision of getting more of our people involved in business. That's the reason why we passed the local content policy, the law. But I'll come to that in a moment. We set aside, since we got into office, the COVID grant. We got money directly to people. The flood relief. We've set aside, because we're concerned about the cost of living. In this budget, apart from all of the other things, we have set aside $5 billion for measures when we discuss with people, we want to make sure that when we discuss with the workers and others, the most affected sections, we can then fund initiatives to alleviate some of the price increases that they face. You can't deal with it totally because it's imported inflation. A lot of the prices that we simply can't do anything because the acquisition cost has gone up, freight has gone up. But we can and we should find ways to address cost of living too, because it's affecting many of our people. And we intent is there. We set aside a sum in the budget for it to be rolled out in consultation with the people of our country. So I will not go back. I'll not go into any great detail again, because you have heard the presentations there from the ministers about all the other measures in the budget for people, for our communities. You know, we're spending about $3.4 billion on hinterland roads, community roads. They don't see that as benefiting people. About $15 billion now on coastal community roads, and in the town as well as in the villages across our country, on the coast, across the region. That's huge expenditure. You know, under APNU, the last areas, you probably have maybe total expenditure $2 billion for that, $2-3 billion for roads in these areas, because they paid little emphasis on capital. Now we see community roads as important, a major provision for it in the budget. These are all may not be directly poor, but it goes, if persons can have better roads in their communities, it's also helped them in many, many ways. So I'm not going to try to justify this point because I think the presenters on our side have been making this point over and over. But this budget seeks to balance addressing people's livelihoods, concerns, creating jobs, expanding our economy, preparing for the future, as well as welfare, enhancing welfare of our people. Let me deal a little bit with the constitutional agencies, because in the public domain we have been getting some heat basically for some of the constitutional bodies not being in place. And at least two of them came to an end in the period when the Parliament was just in recess. The Parliament was in recess. They came to an end in August 2021. The Parliament was in recess until October. So the parliamentary process has now been yielding results, because often in the appointment of these commissions, you have a parliamentary input. So it has always been our position, and from the beginning, I think the president was misquoted as saying he did not want to meet the leader of the opposition. But when the question was posed to him about engagements with the leader of the opposition, and he said, until there is an acknowledgement that this is a legitimately appointed, a legitimately elected government, there is no room for that engagement to move forward. However, he made it very clear that in his constitutional role, we're mandated by the Constitution to have to consult with the leader of the opposition. He was going to discharge his responsibility. So there are several commissions now that we anticipate before the end of February that the president will meet with the leader of the opposition. If by then there is a new leader of the opposition, we're hoping that matter would be resolved shortly. And on that point, let me say that we're vindicated too. You'd recall several times I said that engaging with Mr. Harman might be an exercise in futility, given that he may not have had a mandate from his party. And we were proven correct, that he never had a mandate from his party, although they had a very disappointed show, and Mr. Norton was elected, where only less than maybe about just over a third of their delegates. You need some water? But I drank from this one already. Okay, you can drink from that one. You good? I'll give you time to recover. Yeah. So the point I was making is, and I think we made this point elsewhere, that of the 3,000 delegates that they said, and they were boasting about, I read every media report had, in all the newspapers everywhere, that they had 3,000 delegates, so we're going by what the media said, that only 1,200 voted. So my conclusion as a politician is that if a third of your delegates vote, and they said they had 12,000 members, 3,000 delegates. If a third of them voted, your delegates to the conference, it meant that 2/3 of them felt none of the three candidates were inspiring or was inspiring enough to lead the party. Notwithstanding, Mr. Norton prevailed, as we suspected. And now they're in the process of electing a new leader of the opposition. So once that person is in place, we anticipate that by the end of February, we should have all of the commissions, the service commissions in place, right? So the president will consult with the leader of the opposition on the Judicial Service Commission and putting it back in place, the Public Service Commission, and the Teaching Service Commission. The Police Service Commission, 4 names have been approved by the committee, and it's on the order paper now for the approval of Parliament to come to the President. And I suspect once that comes, the president will then proceed immediately to appoint the Police Service Commission. So we anticipate that all of the commissions would be fully operational by the end of February, because the consultation with the leader of the opposition will take place. On the Integrity Commission, we anticipate that that also will be in place. But let me make it very clear that the Integrity Commission is not in place, but the law and the Secretariat are in place. And there is an obligation for members to submit. We have submitted. Notwithstanding, there is no commission. I've submitted, I know most of our MPs, we'd have to check with everyone, but we've made it clear they have to submit their statements to the Integrity Commission. There is a secretariat. You get a receipt for your submission. So even in the absence of the commission, what APNU did, they not only did not have the commission in place for 3 years, but they refused to take the submissions. And that's why we disagreed with the ruling at that period by the chair of the commission to say that they would not look at the 3 back years, because there was an obligation to comply with the law. The law didn't change. It's just that the commission was not in place, but the secretariat was in place. And so let us make this very, very clear that members of parliament and everyone, they still have to submit, even in their absence. Now, APNU did not submit for 3 years. 2016, 2017, and 2018. They made no submission. They did not accept any submissions in that period. So that's the difference. There's a huge difference here. And so we anticipate that that also will be in place before the end of February. You know that the Parliamentary Standing Committee for Constitutional Reform met on January 18th, and they are meeting again on March 8th. So consistent with the pledge of our manifesto, this year we put in place $125 million in the budget for them to start the work on what we promised in our manifesto, consultations across the country for constitutional reform. So we are hoping now that the budget is in place and they had their first meeting, it's a parliamentary committee, that they will set up the basis for the consultations. We'd already, in our manifesto, because we saw a farcical approach by APNU, to talk about constitutional reform. So we made it clear that we were going to define the model in our manifesto, so people had clarity. And we said 5 from government, 5 from opposition, and 10 from civil society. That would lead the process. And then the recommendations will come to the full National Assembly. We still remain faithful to what we promised in our manifesto to have, and we want that process triggered. On the Public Procurement Commission, the 5 names have been settled, and there's a draft motion now to be approved by the PAC. So we're even hoping that by the end of this month too, that the PAC will meet, approve the draft, so that the president can then proceed to appoint the Public Procurement Commission. So this month we're hoping that most of these constitutional bodies, that they will all be in place by the end of, that is by the end of February. The Representation of People Act, the reform, you would recall that we had 6 weeks for the consultation. We've extended that period. So far, Minister Teixeira said to me that we have had very few submissions as to what, from the various persons. We've had very few. We were expecting an avalanche of suggestions and ideas and stuff. So most likely we'd have to meet soon, look at the submissions we have, see if they can have an impact to improve transparency and predictability surrounding the electoral process as defined by the ROPA. And then we will incorporate those comments as far as possible, and then take it to the National Assembly for debate and passage. And so we're hoping that maybe within the next month or so, we can also spend time now, because people have had over 3 months of public consultations. We put it up on the website. We ask people to make submissions, that we can move the process along to get to the National Assembly. They will be crucial, we believe, for holding local government elections as a test run, because many of the measures that we are putting in place in that bill could then be implemented in the local government reform, which is greater predictability surrounding selection of people, training, the manuals, publication of the manuals, counting of results, publication of results, all of that. Initially, when it came out, we heard a very uninformed comment coming from the opposition, that we're trying to split up Region 4. It's absolutely untrue. In the last engagement we had, in the last elections, I shouldn't say engagement, that was a long-term engagement. It was just an affair. It was like, it lasted a long while. So they had the different tallies being done by the East Coast. We had results for the East Coast, East Bank, South Georgetown, and North Georgetown, because of large numbers. So they were tallying and giving subtotals for each of these 4 areas. All we're saying in the new law, not splitting up Region 4, all we're saying is that you should put, instead of having one RO responsible for the whole region, given the large number of votes, which are like East Coast or South Georgetown has maybe 3-4 times more votes than another region, some smaller regions, then put in separate individuals to run all of these places. So you're not splitting Region 4 up. But they said, the purpose of the bill was to split up Region 4. And that happened in the last election. It's just that Mingo was in charge of all four areas. And that led to a lot of confusion. You recall the so-called 47 boxes that they said didn't have the documentation, when they directed the people not to put those documents in those boxes, but to hand them over to them, and they had them, and then those disappeared. So we are hoping that we can move that forward within a matter of a month, have that table in the National Assembly. Since we're talking about agenda, we're looking at I see a lot of talk has been about hemp. And yes, we are now working on legislation. It would be a highly regulated sector. And please, we don't want 100 persons coming now. Everybody is representing the hemp industry now. We have had a flood of people coming in. It has to be, the law would be passed first. It would be debated in the National Assembly, tabled there, and then have to have an orderly development of the sector, without any abuse. So since I'm on these agencies, I saw there's been a lot of editorializing about the Transparency International, and whilst they haven't been bad about the general improvement in Guyana and the other countries have made, that maybe we slipped 2 points on the index. And so, frankly speaking, I'm very surprised we've only slipped 2 points. Frankly speaking. And because and my fear is that we could possibly go lower when we start and the media coverage starts coming out about the where the Public Accounts Committee, now they're started to look at the Auditor General's report from 2016. Remember, in the entire APNO period, practically, the Public Accounts Committee could not get to consider in great detail what took place in that period. The audit reports were tabled. The Public Accounts Committee didn't get to go through it in great detail. So a lot of the transgressions from that period, and trust me, they were egregious transgressions, they involve violation, serious violation, that you wouldn't even find in a PPP era, any PPP era, a minister taking an unsolicited bid to the cabinet and getting a cabinet approval and then spending $100 and something million on the basis of that approval, which was illegally obtained because the laws of Guyana say that a cabinet cannot approve contracts. It only has a no objection role. So that is in the public domain now, but people read the newspapers globally. They would scan, they would have surveys done. Secondly, the drug bond. That is yet to be explored in its full manifestations. But that over $300 million, nearly $300 million was spent to rent over a two and a half years period a house, a converted house, at the price of $12.5 million a month net of taxes. $12.5 million per month, when the building price, the acquisition cost of the building was $25 million. 2 months of rental would have repaid. And remember that, again, was through no public tender. You would never find that in a PPP government, or something as egregious as that. A $12.5 million a month being paid for a building and a house at that, without any public tender. That's going to come out. We're going to have, what will come out also is that the last government, without any parliament in place, illegally, because the government, after it had fallen, and in the post-election period, when it lost the election, spent in that period, when it had fallen, there was no government practice, well, there was a government, a caretaker government in place, and after the election, spent $419.5 billion without parliamentary oversight. And sometimes we're concerned about a tiny contract now. We don't pay attention to that. But that will come out globally. And my fear is that a lot of these things, because things happen with a lag, the fact that we charge the Minister of Finance for selling a property that's worth maybe $6 billion or $20 million, don't you think that impacts? They assess countries. They don't care about APNO or PPP. That will affect us too. And then the fact that we don't know what TIGI, because we checked all of these transgressions and they were muted. They have turned on the mute button in the whole APNO period when these transgressions were taking place. Very muted. Now they're aggressive again. But we don't know what to report because they seem to have an anti-PPP agenda. We don't see the report they send up. And it would be useful if they're transparent organizations for them to publish what report they send to Transparency International. That would be the ultimate act of transparency, for you to say what you're reporting, because they're very selective. You recall when Harman was on some trip, they said they'll have to meet with him to confirm it. So you have a lot of allegations about PPP corruption and PPP involved in this, etc. But we had evidence. I'm telling you about hard evidence. So every day they say we're corrupt again. But this is hard evidence, and those reports are going to be in the public domain because their period that we have now really assessed all of these audit reports. They're going to come out. It seems as though the country forgot that, and amnesia. The same people were talking, and the organizations like TIGI, they don't have any integrity as far as I'm concerned because they're very selective. Now, if you look at also Transparency International, I believe that they're biased against the developing world, particularly people who are darker. I think one time I said it's almost like a blackness index. When the countries that are darker tend to be, they put them as more corrupt. And it's a Western bias against countries like ours, Western. So we have our gripe about that. But on a factual basis, if you look at these things, there may be justifiable cause for the index or us slipping on the index. It could be a function of misinformation by organizations like TIGI because they have an anti-PPP agenda. And it could be because a lot of these things, as we charge people now, the Minister of Finance gets charged now, then that goes down. Yeah, there was a huge, massive corruption. How could the procurement system, although there is a law, it's not inviolate because the minister can bypass the law and go to the cabinet and get an approval and spend the money. So the system is not robust. TIGI looks at the judiciary too. And you see the variance of decisions that we've had over the elections court case. We've had an assessment, not a flattering assessment done by the judiciary. It's not just executive performance. And thirdly, they look at civil liberties. Now, what was the worst thing? Who tried to snatch away our greatest civil liberty, which is freedom? Who tried to snatch that away from us? First, by violating the Constitution several times, and we had to go to the CCJ to get that corrected. Two, by refusing to obey the Constitution, holding elections on time after they fell. And thirdly, by trying to snatch the elections. Those are, so when people assess these, often they say, oh, it's government, somehow or corruption in government. They assess the country. They assess a lot of these issues. And often with a lag effect. You know, what happens in the past catches up with you now too. So we have to demonstrate that we have a robust system, and that is why systems are in place. We go out, we have a procurement law, we are insisting on following the procurement law. And I come to all of that about how we've been building the robust systems. And it's not that the systems are not in place. It was APNU's illegal behavior. We had a constitution that was clear to everyone, both on the appointment of the head of Gcom and on when you should hold an election, you know, like after no confidence vote. But it's trying to corrupt the system. It's non-adherence that is the problem. And so we have to demonstrate to organizations like Transparency International, etc., that the system is in place. It's the illegal behavior. But unfortunately, you can't punish. You have to go to the court like that. You couldn't catch the head of state and lock him up because you had to go all the way to the CCJ to get it reversed. This is very important for us as we move forward. So I know when you assess these things, there are going to be a lot of people assessing, but they just look at, APNU speaking about the movement on the TI, their Corruption Perception Index, and they may be the largest contributor to that movement and may affect us long into the future as their wrongdoings and misdeeds surface, and they will surface. So let us now talk a bit about the Natural Resources Fund. And so this is again generated a lot of press and opinions. Some are genuine and some are not based on fact. So first of all, in opposition, we made it clear that we are not going to use the NRF that was passed by APNU in the new government. We said there were two issues that we were mainly concerned about. It's cumbersome, and cumbersome to operationalize, and number two, it vests enormous powers, all the powers in the minister directly, the Minister of Finance. And we demonstrated how this was so. So we said we will pursue the amendments to correct this. We said also we want to ensure that there are penalties to address situations similar to what happened with the signing bonus. So what was the frame of mind? Because we have to operationalize this bill. We were taking a lot of flack. If you look at the newspapers too, people are saying, we're sitting on money, we're borrowing, there are development needs for people, and you have to spend the money on the development needs and future growth for Guyana, and blaming the government for not operationalizing the fund. So we started off, we divided this into a few areas. First of all, receipts from oil and gas companies. So let's say number one area is the receipts. So we made it clear that we had that situation where Mr. Jordan said to this country, we never received nor requested a signing bonus. A year after that, the country found out not only had they received the signing bonus, well, in a year, they had deposited it in an account that is not the consolidated fund, nor in the balance sheet of the central bank. Now, our Constitution and the FMA make it, they define how monies, public monies, have to be deposited. First of all, it has to be in the consolidated fund. It could be in three funds: the consolidated fund, a deposit fund, but if you create a deposit fund, it has to be created for a specific purpose and Parliament has to be notified, or a fund created by special legislation, say the Lotto Fund. It's created by special legislation by the Parliament. So They deposited this money in another account, not in any of these three funds, illegally, and answered to the country, we didn't receive the money. Then we heard they were taking money directly from there to pay legal fees for the court case and what else we don't know. So we then said this money has to be paid into the consolidated fund. So clearly, transparency surrounding money coming from the oil companies has to be crucial in our whole drive to transparency around oil money. And how did we fix that? The first thing we fixed in this piece of legislation is we obligated under the new law, the amendment to the NRF, the minister to publish, which was not there before, to publish in the official gazette and notify the parliament within a time period for every receipt from the oil and gas, any oil and gas company that will be paid into the fund. So if it is royalty or profit oil or any other receipt that goes into the natural resources fund, immediately or within a period defined by the Act, the Minister of Finance has to publish that in the official gazette, and they have to notify Parliament. So Parliament knows how much money we receive, and the citizens of the country would know because it's in the official gazette. So at the end of the year, you don't have to guess, you don't have to wait on a government report. All you have to do is to go to all the official gazettes and you add down how much money we receive. And if the figure differs from what the government produces, then you can say, what's going on here? Because the minister has to report every year and on money received through the report from the board of directors. It will have to come to the parliament. So there is great transparency, which was not in the old act, surrounding receipt of funds now. So what if the minister doesn't do this? Well, the law says he goes to jail for 10 years. 10 years if he doesn't publish that in the official gazette or notify the parliament. For every single transaction, every time there is an oil lift or a royalty payment, he has to do this. That's the ultimate in terms of transparency. That was not there in the old act. Jordan could receive and hide the money, which he did. Just receive and hide it. Nothing there. That's point one. So surrounding receipt. So this new act has made the receipt of funds more transparent. The people of our country will know now how much we're receiving. And they don't have to wait to the end of the year. They get it as it comes in, they will know. Secondly, so we receive the money, it comes into the fund. So all of the money is in the fund now. How does government withdraw from the fund? That's the second thing, the withdrawal process. So under the old act, every year, there are two sets of withdrawal that could take place. You had charges that you could withdraw directly from the fund, where they could authorize for all sorts of expenses. We have removed that. You cannot withdraw a single cent directly from the fund except through the budget now, which has to be appropriated. You can't go, nobody can go to the fund and withdraw a single cent now. In the last act, you could have charges that were directly funded from the NRF. That's been removed now. That's one. We remove that. So if the money is not appropriated in Parliament, you can't withdraw. There must be parliamentary oversight over every cent spent of oil money. Can't go to, nobody can say, I'm taking $10 or $1 million for admin expense from the fund. That's prohibited in the new law. So that's the first method of withdrawal. And under the old act, the second method of withdrawal was the Minister of Finance would every year calculate how much he could withdraw. So the calculation is done in this manner. First, the Minister of Finance puts in place a macroeconomic committee, and his nominee chairs the macroeconomic committee. So the macroeconomic committee then makes a recommendation to him, how much, just a recommendation to him, how much money they think is sustainable to withdraw from the fund. The Minister of Finance is then solely responsible for determining the final and the fiscally sustainable amount to withdraw from the fund. He's the only person responsible for determining how much. And he does this on the basis of something called a fiscal rule, which is all assumption based. So you know how you calculate in economics. You can say, like a lot of countries do this. They say if there is a shortfall in the budget based on a revenue, say we anticipate $100 million of revenue, and only $50 million were to come in, then we can draw $50 million from the fund. So what ministers of finance tend to do around the world, they would say we anticipate $150 million. And when you have a shortfall of $100 million now, because you only get 50, they can then draw down $100 million. And who determines the final assumptions made in the fiscal rule? It is the Minister of Finance. Jordan, like under the act, would have been Jordan. So we vested all of the decision making and withdrawal in one man, the Minister of Finance. He decides, and he could manipulate the formula to decide how much will be withdrawn. There's no transparency. Nobody in the public domain will know how the calculations are made, or even if you oppose the calculation. So I could come along as an economist and say, I don't agree with your assumptions. I don't agree with the inflation rate that you're using, but it doesn't matter, because he determines finally what those numbers are. It's assumption based. So what did we replace this with? We replaced this with a fixed formula. No minister has to calculate this now. Nobody has to calculate this every year. In Schedule 1, we said, if we receive X amount of money, up to this amount can come. Now, many people think the whole sum would come, but it says as up to a ceiling of. So you can choose to withdraw less. The Minister of Finance can choose to withdraw less, doesn't have to take it. So, for example, if it says 500 million, or below 500 million, all comes to the budget. Second 500 million, 75%. So that gives you a figure, say 850 million or so. But that's a ceiling. That is not the sum that would automatically come to the budget. He can withdraw up to that level. So it establishes a ceiling that is formula-based. You can't exceed that. And now every citizen of the country sees the formula, they understand it, they can then calculate, they know how much revenue by going to the Gazette we've collected for the year, they can calculate what the Minister of Finance's ceiling will be. You can do that as an ordinary citizen. Everyone in this country can do that. Not one minister, not one person in this country. Every citizen would be able to calculate the ceiling. You will know what it is. So, greater transparency, removal of all the powers vested in the Minister of Finance for withdrawal of funds. And now replacing that with a transparent mechanism. So that's how on the withdrawal side. So greater transparency. On the expenditure side now, so every cent gets paid into the consolidated fund. Every cent that's withdrawn, it goes to the consolidated fund, not separate accounts now. So we went through the receiving the money in the National Resources Fund. The government, through a formula that's transparent to everyone, gets some money to come to the budget now, and it all comes into the consolidated fund. Some remains in the Natural Resources Fund. We'll come to that in a moment. But the money that comes to the budget, how does it get spent? So I saw some statements about, first of all, it comes in basically as budgetary support. It comes to the consolidated fund. But it's crucial how it's spent, because, and that is why I started off on the philosophy. So many people see that our capital expenditure, where it matters, has increased by 110% over last year. But on the recurrent side, it's just less than 20%. I see a lot of headlines saying budget fueled by oil money and all of that stuff. But it's not. If you look at the total budget, the total budget is $552.9 billion. Oil revenue in that budget is $126.6 billion, 23%. It's not the total, it's not just fueled by it. It's the first year oil money is coming in to the budget. But it's only 23% of our total budget, our expenditure, the revenue coming in from oil and gas. So we need to keep that perspective too. Yes, it's important. Oil money is coming in for the first time into the budget, but it's not, you have a bigger budget, a $500 and something billion budget, and this is only 120 billion coming in. So that is crucial. So what happens? People say in the public domain, first of all, that it is not, it is illegal, right? That is illegal. I saw a public comment by one commentator that the expenditure may be illegal because it has to be based on the act, has to be project determined. So this is what it says, withdrawals from section 16 of the act. Says, all withdrawals from the fund shall be deposited into the consolidated fund. So that's condition one. That will be met. Every cent will be deposited in the consolidated fund. And shall be used only to finance a national development priorities, including any initiative aimed at realizing an inclusive green economy, and B, essential projects that are essentially relating to ameliorating the effect of major natural disaster. So natural disaster projects, but national development priorities. The budget is a development tool. The priorities are in the budget. If we had to choosing to give our pensioners, that's why we say selective cash transfer, we would explore that. We put that in our manifesto, we can explore that, and we're looking at fulfilling our or obligations to certain categories for children, older people, etc. But that could be a national development priority. It doesn't say a project. He is saying that it has to be project-based. It does not have to be project-based. Nowhere in the document does it say that budgetary support conflicts with the legislation. In fact, it has to fund it must be paid into the consolidated fund and fund national development priorities as determined by the executive. That's your role. You get elected to determine what national development priorities are. So that I saw that comment about it being illegal and the withdrawal. It is absolutely not true. Secondly, there are concerns, and people say, oh, there are no penalties for misspending oil money. I see that comment too. And some countries have harsh penalties for spending oil money. But the oil money comes in here, in this case, as mainly budgetary support at this stage. So it's difficult to pinpoint in which is oil money because it comes into the consolidated fund as revenue. So that is why the Minister of Finance made it very clear that there is first of all, we will not be able to spend a single cent or finance a single activity from oil money if it is not in the budget. And the budget has to have parliamentary approval and appropriated by the parliament. So every activity in Guyana funded by oil money must be approved by the parliament. That's the first point. Every activity. We can't say tomorrow, oh, we want to approve something else. Let's take some money from the NRF or from the consolidated fund and fund this activity using oil money if it is not in the budget and not passed by Parliament. So that's clear. That's transparency there. Transparency, the parliamentary oversight of every cent of expenditure. So this is use of money. So we move from receipt of money, enhanced transparency there, to the formula, withdrawal from the fund, now to use of money. All of it consolidated fund, every cent appropriated, so that there's none of that. And then the penalties for misuse, the penalties are enshrined in the FMA and the Criminal Law, the Liabilities Offenses Act. You know, you have the criminal acts. If you steal public money, you can be charged. Huh? Yes, the Criminal Offenses Act. So we dealt with three things so far. We're going on to the fourth aspect of improvement on the NRF. So the NRF now, the old version, had the Minister of Finance in charge of management of the fund. Forget about the part about withdrawal, his ability solely to determine how much was withdrawn. Now he deals with the management of the fund. He is the man in charge. He makes all the decision. Now the Minister of Finance is appointed a politician, appointed by the President of Guyana, a politician appointed by the President of Guyana, who is in charge. So it boggles my mind when we decided to replace the Minister of Finance with a board of directors and determine who the members of, by qualification, who the members of the board can be. So they have to be technical people. And then in that board of directors, put on it a member of the private sector and a member from the National Assembly. So where the Minister of Finance controlled everything, managed the fund, and he's appointed by the President and he's a politician. Now we're replacing this with a technical board appointed by the president. I don't know who else would appoint them. The president appoints judges. The president appoints the commissions, the constitutional commissions, but we don't want him to appoint a board of directors. But it's okay when he is minister, who he appointed, who's a politician, was there managing the fund. It was okay then. And I see the policy forum loved that because they were consulted on that, and all of that. So this is the issue, and it bothers me that people don't see a big difference. So they're running off now. Who appoints the board of directors? They can't see the qualitative change. There's a major qualitative change here from transferring this power from one politician and appointed by the president to 5 persons appointed by the president, 3 in his own discretion, which can come but have to be technical people, and then including a private sector and a parliamentary input. It's unbelievable. I thought people would embrace this immediately. Oh, they were not consulted on it. And so that is what we spoke about, insulating, having a group of people make that decision. This is on the management and oversight of the fund. So that's the 4th element. I talk about the withdrawal receipts. I talk about withdrawal, how we have improved that. I talk about use of money, and now management and oversight. So we change the management for the better. We remove the discretionary unilateral powers of the minister to manage the fund, replace it with a board. Now, I've heard comments that this board may be illegal because it's not a body corporate. Now, we sought a legal opinion from the Attorney General Chamber, cited 3 examples: the Guyana Act, Trinidad and Tobago, Norwegian Act, where the board of directors is established in each case by the law itself. You don't need to have them incorporated under the Companies Act. Establish the board of directors. So we dealt with that issue. It is the board of directors is set by the act, and there is precedent for this in many countries. So coming back to that board now will have to submit a report to the Minister of Finance. He has to table that report to the Parliament. For obviously, it would be debated in the Parliament. That's on the management. Oversight, there were 22 organizations, totally cumbersome. You can't have 22 organizations. You have to pay them, and I think some of their charges would have been directly on the fund. 22 persons from all sorts of groups. So we decided to shrink the group. It's now nine representatives, 2 from labor, 2 from the private sector, 3 from religious organizations, 1 from the professions, and 1 from the National Assembly. So we are putting in now somebody from the National Assembly that has to have the approval of both sides on the oversight body. They too have to do a report, and their report will go directly to the Speaker. And so that is on the oversight. Then on the investment committee, the opposition has a nominee. So the investment committee will work with the board and the central bank and obviously the oversight body to see that the resources are well managed. I've dealt with a few key components of the bill. And so if you trace that, those are the critical points. 1, receipt of money. And now today that's totally transparent in the new act. Massive improvement. 2, withdrawal. That's transparent too, and that is formula-based. Remove the discretion of the Minister of Finance. 3, the use of the money. Transparent through a budgetary process, appropriated. And 4, to removing the powers of the minister and vesting it in a board in terms of management and oversight. Those are the key elements of the bill. And so I hope that a lot of the noise we hear, they would pay attention to this. They're more concerned about, there were a few, oh, we're not consulted, the bill was rushed in. We studied every organization and what they've been saying for a while. It's not like we drafted this in a vacuum. And let me make one other point, is that in the bill itself, we built in a mandatory review every 5 years of the first schedule. So that is where the formula is based. So take, for example, if we withdraw, say, 600 million this year, but we start in 4 or 5 years' time, we build all of our highways that our people need. We build all the power plants. We build all of our hospitals. We're looking for 7 new major hospitals, upgrading Bartica, Linden, New Amsterdam, all these hospitals. We complete that task. We could easily change the formula. We built in a review to take less from their fund and save more. So as you finish the national task, build out the infrastructure, so too could the formula be adjusted, but it will have to be done transparently in Parliament so the whole country knows it. And we built in that mandatory review in the legislation itself. And as I said before, is this legislation cast in stone? So assuming as we go forward, assuming we see something egregiously bad about the legislation, including in discussion with civil society, and it's egregiously bad, we can easily go back and adjust it. We can easily adjust it. It's not a fix in stone, but now it becomes operational. It's a vast improvement over what was there. It gives more transparency to the ordinary people of this country, not 1 or 2 persons that would have only known about this. That's what we've done here. And we are very pleased that we have done so. And it's in fulfillment of one of the promises of our manifesto. The second one that we passed, the local content legislation. We made it clear the people of this country must benefit from the industry. And I'm not going to, that issue has been ventilated extensively about how our people are going to be protected and whatever we need to do to protect Guyanese business, Guyanese individuals and business from getting jobs. So we have to be very cautious too. Suddenly people are coming in for like passports and stuff. We have to be very careful. Getting a Guyanese citizenship now suddenly has become enormously valuable for many people. Some people I know from who would never look back to Guyana in all these years. Now they're looking for a great-grandparent who had Guyanese blood to get a Guyanese passport because there's value to it. And we want to keep it like that and grow it in a way. Not to be exclusionary, of course, but our people have to benefit from these opportunities, and we'll do whatever it takes, including leveling the playing field, as I mentioned earlier, on the tax side. And so these are the 2 pieces of legislation. Let me just go quickly with a few other things that may be in the public domain and so I didn't speak for a very long time. And I'm using this. So let me quickly tell you, there's been a lot of controversy about the audit, the post-2017 audit. So we have now gone out back. We have a local consortium. We're going out for an audit that would allow the foreign company to work with the local people and to build capacity here. After we're hoping that after this would be done, the 2017 to the 2020 audit is done, that locals would have all the capacity to do future audit. And this is separate from the audit done by the GRA. So GRA in itself has to build its own capacity to do the audit for tax purposes, but this is here to audit external expenditure to see reasonableness and fairness and all of that, to protect our interests as to what is charged against cost oil. So we don't mind waiting a few more days. It's not going to change. Exxon is not going to erase it directly, say, insist that, oh, there's a 2 years and the time has expired to do the audit. If that happens, they'll have to reopen the whole PSA. And I don't think they want to reopen the PSA. So if they insist on that, so we have the time, but we are going to use this little time, and we've gone out now to tender in the new, to work with the locals to build that capacity. Local content, we're already putting in place the secretariat and the mechanism now. We're getting some consultancies in from Guyana and other places. We started recruiting some staff to get the ball rolling so that we're ready. We have like a 6 months period to get all of this in place. People can still very soon come in and start getting registered. But I think the signal has been sent to the oil companies, and they recognize that they have to work in these areas with Guyanese companies. That list is not exhaustive. We may need to adjust to. If the local capacity is overestimated in the list, we have to give some waivers. But as we go along, we're going to improve on this, but progressively to get more business to our people. But we should fiercely, as a country, defend our right to do this. I see some interlopers now trying to say, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, is anti-CARICOM and all sorts of things. We strongly believe that this is a justice thing. I've seen what other countries have. I've seen Trinidad and Tobago local content policy too. I've seen a lot of things. So we're not backing down on that one. We're not backing down. This is an opportunity for our people to get to get a chance to be able to be priority suppliers of goods and services and employment to the companies. And the foreign companies are not excluded, including regional companies. If they want to be here too, then come and join with a local company. You can buy up to 49% of the shares in the local company. So you're not excluded totally. And you want to be on that list to enjoy the preferences that Guyanese companies enjoy by their legislation now. So they can participate in the capital of the company. On the review of Yellowtail, we have been, there was an expectation that would be done before the end of the year. We've had some setbacks. We've been working more. And so we're anticipating the completion of everything by the end of March, latest, by the end of March now. So we have some consultancies in place, and the ministry has been reviewing. They have a draft license. There's a parallel process at the EPA, and we anticipate that by that period, by the end of March, that the review will be completed and the license issued. The gas to energy project, as you saw, we had gone out separately to pre-qualify. Exxon had done so on the NGL facility, and the government of Guyana on the power plant. There was a study done, and it showed that cost savings could be much if we go as a joint project. The cost savings could be as much as $60 million US. So we decided to go out back for expressions of interest. That was closed on the 20th of January. They're now working to pre-qualify the companies, and then a request for proposal will go out shortly thereafter. So we are anticipating we will start getting bids in sometime by maybe by the middle of the year or so, even earlier than that, depending on the length of time and when the request for proposal will move forward. Where the CGX has found oil there, there may be now increased pressure a bit, because if they move swiftly to move to a new model PSA, so because we had nobody coming forward now on the basis of new fines to move into a new production sharing license. But given that there may be some urgency now to move with a new draft PSA that will correct many of the things that we found wrong with the last, the one that was signed with Exxon. And we made it clear in our manifesto and elsewhere that there will be a new PSA, that any new entrants into the oil and gas company, they would have to come in under those conditions, not the conditions that ExxonMobil did. We're moving ahead on the review of the Petroleum Act. So these are some of the things we're working on. On the LCDS, as you know, we have put it out for consultations. There are technical briefings now going on with various interest groups. And we have next week the first meeting chaired by the President, the multi-stakeholders meeting, to advance the consultation process. We're hoping to finalize that soon. So I think it might be going on for a while. I have about 8 issues more. So, right, thank you very much. Yeah, so I take questions now.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo. Kiana Wilberg from the Kaiser News Oil and Gas Department. Sir, I have a few questions for you. First, starting on the Yellowtail project. At your last press conference, you noted that efforts were being made to get some sort of acknowledgement from ExxonMobil regarding as much as $2 billion in insurance coverage for the project before it commences operations. Can you provide us with an update as to whether ExxonMobil is inclined, the parent company that is now inclined to give us the full coverage insurance, or are they still steering clear of that? Secondly, sir, with regard to the disparity in taxes that's paid by locals versus foreign companies, can you say exactly, apart from the measures in Budget 2022, how is the local content legislation now dealing with that, leveling the playing field to ensure that the subcontractors of ExxonMobil and other companies that enjoy a tax-free break, the same is enjoyed by our locals so that they can put forward competitive bids as well?
Yes, sir.
And can you also say how the legislation deals with local companies that have an issue with finding collateral so that they can get the loans needed to also make themselves further competitive? ExxonMobil, this is on another issue, sir. ExxonMobil has missed another deadline to fix the new gas compressor issue. That was supposed to be addressed December, January. They continue to experience design issues. It's moved back to first half of the year. Can you say if there are going to be any sort of punishment or increase in flaring fees, given that the deadline has been pushed back again? And on the CGX matter that you mentioned, can we anticipate to see better terms in the deal that is likely to happen when CGX decides to go into a production sharing agreement? I'll stop there for now.
Sure. Okay, all right then. So let me start with that. The last point, yes. The answer is yes. So the PSA will see better terms for Guyana than the one that was signed for Stabroek Block. Let me just say that. That's the idea, the entire idea with drafting a new PSA and addressing some of those concerns. I don't want to get into too details because I can go through some of the issues that were raised about royalty rate and ring fencing, and all of those issues have to be looked back, tax treatment, whole range of issues. So those would have to be looked at. There are about 10 or 11 areas that we've identified. A lot of them to do with the fiscal terms, to have a look at. We also, let me just be very nuanced too, because I like to be clear so people don't understand. We have a window in which we want to accelerate the production to transfer what is a buried asset and might become stranded into financial assets. And so we therefore have to take that into account too. However, the conditions will be better. So to answer that in short. Secondly, on the compressor, the fine is pretty hefty now. It's a pretty hefty fine. And one of the few countries that have put a carbon-based fine on flaring. So I thought that moving it there, so they would have to continue paying. They'd have to pay us, for every ton of emission emitted, where no other emitter in Guyana pays for, not from any factory or anything else. They are paying for that because the emission is the same, whether you flare or you put out burning fossil fuel in your generator. It's emission. No other company or sector in Guyana has to pay for this. So this is specific to the oil and gas sector, and the rates are pretty high too. Well, now the carbon trading market has skyrocketed in the past because of the move upwards of the price for gas. The price for gas tripled in Europe because of supply issues with Russia. So that pushed up the emission trading, the price of the credits on the emission trading schemes. But here in Guyana, I think we had a fairly high level of fine, and that was introduced by us. There are two things on the local content. So it's not, we'd have to do a lot of capacity building for our companies. So the first stage is to get them registered, and we'd have to work with our companies. But those are two areas that are very important that you mentioned. The one about tax treatment, and that's why the minute we discussed this, the Minister of Finance made it specifically that we are going to end this. So we're going to accord them, we're going to give direct instructions that when you bid for any job, you bid on the same basis as any foreign company. You don't have to put any taxes in it, net of taxes. So that's what I said. You bid, you submit bid, net of taxes. So that's why I'm pointing out that wherever Exxon has passed on its fiscal benefits to its suppliers, the local suppliers have to get the same treatment. So if they passed it on to Schlumberger or Halliburton or Trinidadian company, then the local people can't be placed at a competitive disadvantage. So we are firm on that. That's going to happen. They know this. This is a public statement we made, and it would be treated that way in the GRA and everywhere else, the Ministry of Finance. So that's one. And most likely we'd have to, at some point in time, create the legislative tool to do that, because the budget often is a statement of intent. Legislation often comes to give effect, but we can do this administratively now. Secondly, collateral. And so this issue came up in the consultations with the local companies. A lot of them may get a contract, they win a contract, but they can't raise money using the contract. And that has a lot to do with our commercial banks and the instructions from the central bank, how we treat collateral and what we can use as collateral. So the Minister of Finance will have to, I possibly be part of that meeting, I'd have to ensure that we work out an arrangement where people can raise funds against verified contracts or contracts that they win, already. And this happens in some countries. So, and the commercial banks may be, they're willing to go this route too. You understand what I'm saying? So if,
Is
for
that
example, if I have a 5-year contract with ExxonMobil to say provide transportation of 10 vehicles, then using that contract,
That's correct.
I can go to the bank and the bank verifies the contract and say that it's a 5-year contract, your repayment terms would allow you to take the vehicle and repay them and make a profit.
Okay.
Then they can lend against that. So that is what we're exploring to bypass some of the collateral requirements. And the
Insurance.
license, yes, the insurance, this is ongoing discussion, and it's done mainly at the EPA. So that was their position, the EPA position on the table. They've been negotiating this. So the EPA, at the end of the day, we'll see this in the I don't want to, I said that what we were trying to achieve, to get the parent company to give us an insurance. I don't want to give a ball-by-ball blow because you know the intention already. You'll see the final product when it comes out. But we are pressing hard for that sort of engagement or commitment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Marcel Thomas from the Starbuck News. I'm trying to get clarity first on CGX. Are you saying that CGX would be subject to a new PSA? Is that it?
Yeah, they have to, yes. When they come in a production sharing agreement, they have to sign a production sharing agreement. Yeah, with us. So we made it clear, any new thing, that's a policy statement. It's not, Marcel, I'm surprised that this is surprising to you. We've been saying this all the time, that any new, even Exxon comes in on the Kaichor and Kanji block.
But this isn't new.
Huh?
How is this new? Aren't they holding to an old agreement? CGX, Anandarko, Exxon. I'm kind of confused on this one.
No, recall before, there's a lot of controversy about the PSA that Trotman signed with his wife as the witness. The agreement, I shouldn't say that, maybe a thing, but it's true. The agreement that was signed, that agreement, there's been a lot of controversy about it every day. I saw even Patterson saying now conveniently, when he was general secretary of the party, they didn't want to renegotiate. His boss signed the agreement, and the address on the agreement, the local address, is the law office of Mr. Nigel Hughes. So all the AFC thing. So that agreement, and everyone is saying that doesn't give Guyana a fair share of the proceeds. So we made it clear that at this point in time, we will not renegotiate the agreement. Right? And from opposition. We then said, however, that any new PSA that has to be signed, so to develop any new area into production, they have to sign a new agreement. And that agreement, in that agreement, we will seek to correct some of the disadvantages of the one that was signed. So when they're ready to move into that, they'd have to come to the government, CGX, to move into, say, production or the development phase to work out that new agreement.
Still on oil and gas. Has Exxon signaled to government that the Liza Destiny FPO would be done in March. And I wanted to
They
know
could
if for how
very well
long-
have, I don't remember, I don't have day-to-day responsibility of the sector. It's easy to ask the minister. There's a minister, I don't know if they signal to him, because those would be routine transactions. I deal a little bit on the policy side. I deal with the policy issues mainly and stuff. And once the policy is in place, I then move on. It's administered by the ministry.
Okay,
So you can easily, if they signal that.
finish with that. NRF,
Yes.
that issue, it keeps being repeated that Parliament would have an oversight. But how do you account, Parliament is both opposition and government, how do you account for the opposition's input when government has a majority, and government can very well use that majority, or would very well use that majority, to nominate their person on the board for the NRF?
Okay. So there's always that possibility, but we want to make sure that we have somebody that has the confidence of both sides, and we will aspire to do that. But yeah, so go on. Mhm.
So you
Yes.
aspire to ensure
Yes,
that there's
yes, but
inclusivity
recall,
with
but
the opposition?
Marcel,
Yes, sir.
recall what was there before. Before this board was in place, the minister appointed by President Granger as a politician was in charge.
But Dr. Jagdeo, we're not looking at the before. We're
Yeah,
looking
no,
at
no,
going
but we
ahead and
always have to.
And transparency.
No, but yes.
No,
Okay,
there were
all right.
objections even to that one.
All right,
We're
okay.
looking ahead, and we're looking
And that's why we
better.
looked ahead and we put in place a board.
And that's why we're asking about better
Right,
and
yes.
accountability.
And I assured you, we will try to get someone who has the support of both sides.
Okay, and my final question, your signature on the $2,000
Yeah.
note.
Oh, I see that as a controversy. That was
Not a
an
controversy.
overhang from the past. Maybe that will change in the future. You should ask the president who. That's the president.
Why can't I ask
You should
you?
ask the president about that.
But
Ask the
it's your
president about that one. I'm not answering that one. You ask the president about that one. The president ought to, is the president's signature in the Gazette, not mine.
Mr. Jagdeo, Kurt Campbell, Newsroom. I just wanted to ask you about how plans are progressing on auctioning the remaining oil blocks, as was promised for the third quarter.
Okay.
Additionally, and I don't mean to labor the question, but I wanted to know if you'd be willing to provide at least 2 examples of how the new PSA will differ from the old one. And thirdly, on the question as it relates to flaring, I wanted to know if government is comfortable with the flaring as long as Exxon continues to pay those hefty fines that you talked about.
Well, clearly the last point, we would like the flaring to stop. That is clear. There is a no flaring policy in the environmental permit. So if you just wanted the money, we'd say, don't flare as much as you want, and then we just collect the money. So there is a no flaring. But this is a real problem, because they have to pay for this, they have to pay a fine. So I think they want to fix it too, but it's a real problem. It's not getting fixed. So that's clear. We support a no flaring policy. They have issues with this compressor that's been going on, hard to resolve. But whilst they're not fixing, whilst they can't fix it, they have to pay for the flaring. The one about, as I mentioned before, I don't want to get into the details, but I just mentioned 3 areas earlier, like ring fencing, fiscal terms, rate of royalty, all of those issues can come back in the new PSA. And what was the first one? Sorry.
It was about the auction of the oil blocks.
Oh yes. So we're looking at that. That's why we said the third quarter of 2022. So we're looking at the relinquishment to see that all of those who have to relinquish, they relinquish the property. We're yet to make a determination, however, and we've been receiving lots of advice that we should pay and go with the seismic. that you could possibly increase the value of the blocks if you auction them. But that also has a downside. If the seismics don't come out well, you may have less of an interest, and it requires upfront expenditure. Or alternately, just auction the blocks off as they are, and then you may get a price. It may not be a very high price for the blocks because people don't know what's there. They don't have seismic to interpret. So that we have to solve that issue one way or another. And then there's been a third suggestion, something that we'd explore a long time, but we may have to return to, that whether we want to vest all these blocks into a national oil company. And that is something that has surfaced back. I'm not saying we have decided on that, but a lot of countries have done that, keep for a national oil company. But that requires, in this era, it is very hard to raise financing for exploration and development. And this is big bucks you're talking about, billions of dollars. So that is acting against going forward with that idea. I'm just being open with you, what's the issues there, but definitely those decisions will be made so in time for the third quarter, so we can go through a transparent system.
Sir, Navendra Siraj, Guyana Chronicle.
Yes.
Can you disaggregate the proposed expenditure, the proposed capital expenditure into the sectors, and possibly reiterate what are some of the big projects?
Every minister does that, and it's a part of they got a budget at a glance or something. There's a budget at a glance. So if you do that, I don't want to go through that here. I want to deal mainly with the policy. So just look the budget at a glance. It tells you how much money in each sector. And there are really great initiatives there. Like we have $300 million for small business. We have, like I didn't mention this yet, we have money to hire, give temporary employment to over 8,000 people in Guyana because in areas where you have low employment. We have money in the budget for the co-investing for areas where you have high unemployment. So, like for example, some areas in Essequibo, building the call center shell and getting people to operate the call centers. We did that in Linden, building out the shell. So a lot of those initiatives, don't get stuck too much with the numbers. Look at the people initiative behind many of the numbers. But the numbers are self-evident, and they're there in that budget at a glance. I don't want to deal with a lot of those. You'll hear them in the debate. I'm not even sure I'd speak.
Last question. Can you say if there are provisions in the budget for preparations for LG, or whether Gcom has requested funds for the
Yeah, there are provisions for local government elections. There are provisions. But that decision has to be made by not by us. Gcom has to tell us, because often it's the executive people look to, but it's a Gcom constitutional body that makes that determination on readiness. So I just wanted that. Okay then, thank you very much. Okay.